All right, guys, welcome back. So last lesson, we talked about economic systems between World War I and World War II. And we looked pretty much exclusively at the United States. And we talked about the United States, the New Deal, and FDR's program to kind of reboost the economy in the aftermath of the Great Depression. Now, after we talked briefly about the United States, we then moved on to Germany. And I told you guys about the misery that was post-World War I Germany, and kind of how that led to what we know about World War II Germany, the rise of Adolf Hitler and the economic policies that he implemented by way of the Nazi Party. Now, there is another country that we need to talk about, and one that is very, very, very important, especially when we get on to Unit 8, okay? Unit 8 is all about the Cold War. In order to really understand the ideological, the sides of the Cold War, the United States versus the Soviet Union, you kind of have to have an understanding of the economic policies that really define the Soviet Union. So, as you guys know, the Soviet Union was communist, but the Soviet Union had sort of its own brand of unique communism, especially in between World War I and World War II, because the Soviet Union is going to be led by a man named Joseph Stalin, okay, one of the great baddies in history, and one of my favorite people to talk about. So that's what we're going to be doing today, guys. We will be talking about the economic policies of the Soviet Union and how Stalin's abysmal personality truly defined this era. But to start, this picture right in front of us is a photo of Lenin, all right, the guy that Stalin took over from. And this is sort of the great idea of these communist economic policies. And obviously we'll see that they don't work, but we'll get there. So guys, we're still in period 4. We're still in unit 7, and it's getting us right to the footsteps or the doorstep, whatever, of World War II. So we'll start with a meme, and then we're going to jump right on into Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union. Now, again, guys, I know I say this a lot, but this is an important lesson. Unit 8, which is all about the Cold War, is going to build on your understanding of the ideological differences between the capitalist United States, okay, and the communist Soviet Union. Although from our last class, you know that the United States doesn't always have unregulated capitalism. Just like the Soviet Union's version of communism isn't going to be true blue communism. But that's what we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. So, dad joke, but still excellent. Remember, guys, this is Lenin, and this is his predecessor, Stalin. So I did want to start with a photo. We've already talked about the guy in the middle, this giant tool bag right here, Adolf Hitler. And I briefly mentioned this guy right here, old baldy here, Benito Mussolini. He's going to be the Italian fascist leader. But in this World War II era, I do want you guys to understand that while Joseph Stalin ends up on sort of the right side of World War II, he kind of ends up on the ally side. I don't want you to think of him as a hero, because Joseph Stalin is a villain in every sense of the word. He's one of the great butchers of the 20th century, alongside Adolf Hitler and a Chinese communist leader who we'll talk about later, named Mao Zedong. The thing that's somewhat interesting about Joseph Stalin is that the amount of people he murdered, we still haven't quite quantified it. We don't know exactly how many people he's murdered. We know it's a lot, and we know they're all his own people, most of whom actually supported him. So Joseph Stalin is a ruthless, horrific guy, and I try really hard in this class not to come out telling you guys what my political opinions are or what my opinions are about certain things, but I do want you to understand that Joseph Stalin's a bad guy, and there's just no way to get around that. All right, guys, so as usual, I do want to give you guys a little bit of a context. All right, as I said, we're going to be talking about Russia quite a bit in this class, especially after World War II, when we get onto the Cold War. So again, if you get an LEQ or a DBQ about Russia, it's always good to have some context. So we actually did not talk about Russia at all in period 1. I didn't make you do a G Persia chart, so yay for that. We did talk about Russia in period 2, right, briefly. I told you that they have an absolute monarch, the Tsar. All right, the Tsar is actually Russian for Caesar. And during period 2, their whole country is this little bit of brown right here. And that leads us to period 3, eastward expansion. So Russia is going to expand rather quickly. All right, they're going to go eastward, right? And they're going to engage in the process of Russification. So while they continue to conquer indigenous groups in this area of Siberia, very, very cold area, they're going to sort of inflict their culture on these people. Again, Russification. When you require this sort of conquered indigenous group to speak Russian, to embrace Russian culture, to pay taxes to the Russian Tsar. During period 3, we also see state-sponsored industrialization. So the Russian Tsar, he kind of looks at the rest of Europe, he kind of looks at England and France, and he's like, look, they have industrialized way quicker than we have. We need to industrialize. And so through tax collection, the government will pay for factories. It will pay for mines. It will pay for railroads. It will pay for this new industrialization process. It's also going to free the peasants. So historically, very poor Russians, the lowest class in society, all worked on farms. But we're going to free the peasants so that they now can go work in these new factories. All right, so they're not really free. And again, in period 3, Russia will have an absolutist leader, the Tsar. So if you're mad at the government, if you're mad at the injustices of this industrialization, what you really are mad at is the Tsar, okay? And that's going to bring us to period 4. So right off the start, Russia's going to lose an important war against the Japanese in 1906. So that's really embarrassing. You're going to lose a war to people you've considered inferior. On top of that, a few years later, they're going to join World War I on the side of the Allies. However, they lose the war because they quit the war early. All right, they sign a separate peace with Germany. All right, and that's not good for them. But on the other hand, when they get out of the war, it's also occurring because the Tsar has stepped down, and it will be replaced by a provisional capitalist government. Okay, that won't last very long. We'll also have a Russian Revolution and the Russian Civil War. And that's going to bring us to where we are today. The result of the Russian Civil War is that the Russian Communist Party, or the Bolsheviks, have taken over. Okay, so we've got to figure out how Vladimir Lenin, who is the leader of the Bolsheviks, is going to implement this communist utopia. And that's where the lecture begins. So you guys don't have to write this down, but I do want to give you guys a little refresher. It's been a few days since we've talked about this. So at the end of World War I, all right, Russia decides to drop out of the war in 1917. Okay, now they drop out of the war in 1917 when the Tsar steps down and he is replaced by a provisional government, right? And that sounds great and all, except that Russia continues to lose the war. And so finally they decide we're just going to drop out. All right. Now, the problem is, guys, is that this provisional government is blamed for losing the war, even though the provisional government was only in charge for not really that long. So instead, the Communist Party, okay, the Bolsheviks, who are going to be led by this guy right here, Vladimir Lenin, they're going to really expunge on this power, this anger, and this mob violence. These peasants who, they were freed in period 3 to work in the factories, but they never got the right to vote. They never got, laws that kind of helped them, okay? And so people are really, really angry. First, they're angry at the Tsar, and now they're angry at this new government. And they're furious about World War I. Why did we even get into this war in the first place? And so, guys, the Bolsheviks, this Communist Party, they're going to run on this logo of peace, land, and bread. So peace in World War I, land for all of us because communism, and bread, so food for everybody. And that's going to draw a lot of support from the lower class poor. Now, here's where I need you guys to start taking notes. So guys, we've already talked about the Russian Civil War. So essentially after the revolution, after the October Revolution, we're going to go undergo a civil war between the whites and the reds. So really, really bloody civil war, 20 million people die, okay? 20 million people die. Think about that, guys. The American Civil War, 600,000 die. So the Russian Civil War is a bloody, horrific conflict. And this is coming right after World War I. So not exactly a good place to be, all right? Russia's not exactly where you want to be in the early 20th century. But after the victory of the Civil War, the Reds, or the Bolsheviks, take power. And again, guys, they're led by this guy, Vladimir Lenin. All right, now Lenin is a true believer in communism. He wants to implement this Marxist, he wants to do this true Marxist society. All right, so Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto, he wants to take Karl Marx's actual word for word communism and implement it in the Soviet Union. So what he does is in 1921, he creates something called the New Economic Policy. And the fact is it's not effective. Marxism is not effective in the Soviet Union. Okay, why? Well, think about it. Why would you work hard in this class if I wasn't giving you more grades? Okay, why would you do any extra work if you weren't getting extra money? All right, the fact is, guys, is communism, while it is amazing on paper, tends not to work unless you give people incentives. So in the aftermath of the Russian Civil War, this Marxist communist stuff ain't gonna work. All right, people are not going to work unless you give them incentives to. And Lenin understands that. And shockingly, Lenin decides to implement something called the New Economic Policy. And essentially what this is instead of true blue Karl Marx communism, he's going to allow farmers to grow a little bit of extra food and sell them for a little bit of extra money. He's going to allow industrial factories to work a little bit harder and compete for rewards. So again, this is not true communism. Remember, true communism is everybody works on the farm and makes the same amount of money and puts the same amount of work in. Okay, everybody works in the factory and does the same amount of time in the factory and makes the same amount of money. And here Lenin is 2 years into this new communist utopia, and he's throwing these ideals away. So as you can imagine, the true believers of communism are pissed. Okay, and one of the true believers of this Marxist communist utopia is Lenin's future successor, Joseph Stalin. And Joseph Stalin thinks that Lenin's new economic policy is selling out to those capitalist jerks. And the problem is, guys, is he might be right. But if you want to feed your people and if you want to, make people actually go to work every day, you got to give them incentives. And while Joseph Stalin might have had opposition towards this new economic policy, the fact is it was working. And Lenin was going to continue this sort of quasi-capitalist communist economic policy until his death in 1924. So as I told you guys, the world would look very different today if Lenin was able to actually build the Soviet Union into this communist utopia. The problem is that just a few years after it becomes its own freed communist state, Lenin's going to die, and he's not going to be able to shape the Soviet Union in the image that he wants, okay? And who will take over for him? Well, this horrific human being right here, a man named Joseph Stalin, okay? Give me 1 second. Now, I am going to do the rest of this lecture in Stalin's military hat. Actually, I'll probably wear it for just 5 minutes and then get bored of it. But after Lenin dies, the Soviet Union embraces a new leader, Joseph Stalin. Okay, you guys have probably seen portraits of him in hats this ridiculous. This is actually a communist hat. You can probably see the little hammer and sickle. And as I said, guys, Joseph Stalin is a true believer in Karl Marx communism. And so the first thing he's going to do when he gets to power is get rid of Lenin's new economic policy. All right, get rid of this quasi-capitalist BS. And instead, he's going to embrace something called the 5-year plan. So what is the 5-year plan? It is a new economic policy. This starts in the mid-1920s. And basically, what this policy is this. We're going to rapidly industrialize. So we're going to put more of our money into creating more factories, right? In his mind, he thinks more factories equals more money, which sure, maybe, but you also have to have workers that actually want to work in these factories, but I digress. The other part of his 5-year plan that is critical to understand is that he collectivizes agriculture. What the heck does that mean? Basically, every one of those peasants that supported the communists, I don't really think they understood what they were supporting, because what happens here is Joseph Stalin confiscates all of their land. So all of those farming lands, ancestral homelands that people have been working on for generations, is confiscated by the Soviet government. And instead, they create government-funded communal farms. All right, communal equals communist. So basically, if your family owns 100 acres of land, and that used to be your historic land that you would work on. Now we're going to take that 100 acres, and we're going to take all of your neighbors' 100 acres, and we're going to make a giant farm that has 1,000 acres. But you and all of those previous owners of that land are going to work on this farm. And whatever money you make, you're going to split it evenly. So if you work really hard, all right, doesn't matter, because you're going to be making the same as your neighbor. If you don't do anything, doesn't matter, because you're still going to be making the same as your neighbor. And that is what collectivization of agriculture looks like, guys. Now, the other part of this 5-year plan is the command economy, all right, which is just really a fancy word for government is in control of everything. So the government dictates who makes what, how much things cost, and all that stuff, all right? So make sure you guys understand that we go from this new economic plan to this 5-year plan, all right? If you guys do not understand communism yet, hopefully this will help. It's not about you, it's all about all of us. All right, guys, so I can't do this that much longer. But guys, I don't know if I've made it clear enough to you, but Joseph Stalin is a giant, horrible, horrific human being. He is going to be a villain that we talk about in this class. He'll do some pretty awful things during World War II, and he's going to do some pretty awful things during the Cold War. But he also does some pretty awful things to his own people, including people that have supported him. Now, a couple classes ago, we talked about genocides, and I think I told you guys the first genocide of the 20th century was the Armenian genocide happening by the Ottoman Empire, okay? We're going to talk about another genocide today, one in which the Russian government inflicts on its own people. So naturally, the 5-year plan fails. Shocker. And because Stalin is somebody who basically does not know how to accept any sort of responsibility, and also does not, or he refuses to accept that communism doesn't always work. Instead, he's going to do what Hitler did in Germany, and he's going to create that sort of big lie. And what Stalin will do is he will blame a subsect of society called the kulaks, okay? The kulaks are upper class farmers. So historically in the Russian Empire, you had kulaks. So they're kind of a group of people who were actually just really good at farming. So they're primarily from modern day Ukraine, and a lot of them lived on the land for generations. And they grew the best food, and that was kind of where all the food was coming from. So Stalin essentially says that after the 5-year plan fails, that the kulaks are the ones that sabotage the system, okay? These people, these former capitalists who made all this money, they sabotaged our collective culture, all right? They hoarded all the agriculture, all right? Everything that was grown that extra, they were the one that hoarded it. And he convinced other people within the Soviet Union that the only reason the 5-year plan will fail is because of these kulaks. And so he's going to call for the removal of these people, okay? Now, let me emphasize that the kulaks were also the best farmers. So if you call for the removal of the best in something, think about it. If basically they took all the best teachers out of CHS, or they took all the best doctors out of the hospital, if they took all the best students out of your grade, what would happen? Yeah, things will go bad. So guys, dekulakization was the process of removing, imprisoning, and killing these successful peasants. And when you remove, you kill off the best farmers, who's going to be left behind? Yeah, the worst farmers, the people who maybe don't even know how to farm, the people who need the kulaks to actually learn the craft. Now, historians today aren't really sure how many of these kulaks were killed. People tend to argue whether or not this was indeed a genocide, but 5 to 6 million kulaks were likely killed in this process of dekulakization. So among all the genocides we've talked about in this class, we've got the Armenian genocide, and now we have dekulakization. Now, not only were these kulaks murdered because of the government, some of them were sentenced to hard labor until death. And if you guys don't know what this word is, you need to learn it. The gulag, okay? It is the Russian word for prison. It's a work camp system in Siberia. And essentially, people that were members of the kulaks or were members of people who opposed Stalin were often sent to this forced labor camp. It was essentially slavery until death. And a lot of people died in this gulag system. I think we'll probably talk about the gulag in the future, but I highlighted it because I want you guys to know what it is. So, don't worry, guys. Stalin couldn't get enough of blaming other people. This guy literally takes no responsibility whatsoever for his own shortcomings. So, towards the end of the 30s, all right, Stalin is starting to catch wind that people in his government maybe don't love him. The horror, what? People don't love me? And so this guy is a paranoid psychopath, all right? And he thinks that someone's going to rebel against him, probably one within his inner circle. And so what Stalin does is, like any crazy dictator, he executes anyone in the military and government that he believes is not 100% loyal to him. So he has killed 5 to 6 million kulaks, and now he is executing what we believe to be 1.2 million Soviets. And this is going to be known as the Great Purge. Now, we've killed the best farmers in the country, and now we're killing the best military leaders and the best government leaders. What do you think is going to happen to the Soviet Union in World War II if we are getting rid of our best military class? Good point. We're probably going to get our butts kicked by the Nazis. And that's kind of exactly what happens. So Stalin's paranoia is going to bite him in the butt. Funny story, not on these slides. He also executes his doctors. So the doctors that tell him things he doesn't want to hear. So towards the end of his life, he has a stroke, and there are no doctors left to save him. So yes, Stalin will get his in the end. We just have to wait until he does some really awful things first. I did want to give you guys a chance to look at this picture. Stalin was actually one of the first sort of pre-Photoshop characters that used to actually like create photos and pull out people that he executed. So this guy right here, do not feel bad for him. He was a high up military leader that also executed people. But after Stalin had him killed, Stalin also wiped down the photos so he never had to be seen in photos with him. All right. So again, that pre-Photoshop world exists. Now, during the Great Purge, during dekulakization, the Soviet Union looked like this, all right? During these famines, when hundreds of thousands of people were dying because the kulaks were gone, the Soviet Union, people were starving and people were being killed. And yet, despite all that, Joseph Stalin created a hero cult. Now, You guys probably have heard the stories of Kim Jong-un over in North Korea doing his weird little stuff, like taking photos with himself and, acting like he's the great leader. Well, that comes from somewhere, and that comes from the hero cult that Joseph Stalin created for himself. Now, Joseph Stalin was not only a mass murderer and psychopath, but he was also a narcissist who loved himself. And so after his 50th birthday in 1929, part of his sort of rule over the Soviet Union also, he sort of implemented his personality. If you were a true believer in this communist, if you were a good Soviet, you loved Joseph Stalin. You worshiped him. Okay. He was a hero. And part of what he did was he forced the press of the Soviet Union to kind of respond to him as this all powerful, all knowing leader. So whatever General Stalin said goes. All right. Everything Stalin does is brilliant and wonderful. He's a true believer of communism. He loves babies. He's just amazing. We all want to be like him. Public schools within the Soviet Union were required to teach a curriculum that glorified Stalin and the achievements that he so-called did. He didn't really have that many achievements. After he eventually dies out, when we actually look at all the things he did more negative things than positive things. But because of this hero cult, and because he required people of the Soviet Union to sort of worship him, we didn't really know how bad he was. Okay. So guys, we'll talk more about the Soviet Union in coming days, but I need you guys to understand what is happening in the economic situation between World War I and World War II. The US and the New Deal, all right, that rejection of unregulated capitalism, Nazi Germany, and now this sort of quasi-capitalist, communist, Stalin hero cult of personality going on in the USSR. Because all of these economic systems are going to come head to head when we get to World War II. All of these downfalls, shortcomings are going to kind of face off against each other in the coming days, okay? So guys, as usual, if you've missed class and you're watching this to catch up, please go ahead and send me an email for your in-class assignment. And if not, have a great rest of your day, guys, and I will see you in class.